What started as the happiest day of their lives turned into San Francisco's most haunting mystery. When newlyweds Sarah and Michael vanished without a trace from the Golden Gate Bridge, investigators had nothing, no witnesses, no evidence, no answers. For 5 agonizing years, their families lived in unbearable limbo, desperate for closure. But then the Coast Guard made a discovery that changed everything. What they found buried in the sand would expose a truth no one saw coming. Before we uncover what really happened to Sarah and Michael, I want you to know this isn't about sensational headlines. It's about finding the truth that 2 families desperately needed. If you're someone who can't rest until mysteries are solved, you're exactly where you belong. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and which unsolved case keeps you up at night? Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten stories back into the light, and that matters more than you know. Sarah Chen and Michael Rodriguez were the kind of couple that made everyone believe in true love. Both 28, successful in their respective careers, Sarah as a pediatric nurse, Michael as a software engineer, they had met 3 years earlier at a charity fundraiser in downtown San Francisco. Friends described them as inseparable, the type of couple who finished each other's sentences and never seemed to argue about anything that mattered. Their wedding day on September 15th was everything they had dreamed of. The ceremony took place at a beautiful vineyard in Napa Valley, with over 200 guests celebrating their union. The weather was perfect, the speeches were heartfelt, and every photo captured pure joy. Sarah's maid of honor later told police that she had never seen her friend happier. Michael's best man said the groom couldn't stop smiling all day. As the reception wound down that evening, the couple said their goodbyes and headed back to San Francisco for their wedding night at the luxurious Fairmont Hotel. They planned to fly to Hawaii the next morning for their honeymoon. Little did anyone know this perfect day would be the last time anyone would see them alive. The Golden Gate Bridge held special significance for Sarah and Michael. It was where Michael had proposed 18 months earlier, on a foggy morning that had cleared just as he dropped to one knee. They often walked across the bridge on weekends, taking photos and talking about their future together. Sarah had posted dozens of pictures of them at various spots along the span, always with captions about how the bridge represented their connection. 2 separate places joined by something beautiful and strong. But the Golden Gate Bridge carries a darker reputation that locals know all too well. It's one of the most recognizable suicide locations in the world, with over 1,700 confirmed deaths since its opening in 1937. The bridge sees millions of visitors each year, making it simultaneously one of the most public and yet most isolated places in the city. On any given day, thousands of people cross it, but somehow individual tragedies can occur without witnesses. The irony wasn't lost on investigators that a place representing hope and connection for Sarah and Michael would become the center of such darkness. What happened next at this iconic landmark would puzzle investigators for years. The last confirmed sighting of Sarah and Michael came from hotel security cameras at the Fairmont at 11:47 p.m. on their wedding night. The footage shows them entering the elevator, still in their wedding attire. Sarah in her reception dress, a shorter, more comfortable version of her ceremony gown, and Michael in his wedding suit, but with his tie loosened. They appeared happy, laughing about something as the elevator doors closed. What makes this sighting so crucial is what happened next. According to hotel records, they never returned to their room that night. Their luggage remained untouched, their Hawaii flight was missed, and their rental car was found the next morning in the Golden Gate Bridge parking area. The car was locked, with Sarah's purse inside containing her phone, wallet, and the small bouquet she had carried during the bouquet toss. Security cameras near the bridge showed their rental car arriving at 12:23 a.m., but the lighting and angle made it impossible to clearly see who was inside or what happened after the car parked. After this moment, Sarah and Michael simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions. It was Sarah's sister Jennifer who first realized something was wrong. She had planned to meet the couple for brunch before their flight, a tradition they had maintained since college. When they didn't answer their phones or respond to texts, Jennifer went to their hotel room. Hotel staff confirmed the couple had never returned, and their luggage sat exactly where housekeeping had placed it the night before. The transition from concern to panic happened quickly. Jennifer called Michael's family, who immediately tried reaching him. His parents drove to San Francisco from their home in San Jose, arriving at the hotel within 2 hours. By 2 p.m., when the couple had officially missed their flight to Hawaii, everyone knew something was terribly wrong. Sarah's parents called the police from their home in Portland, demanding an immediate investigation. The couple's friends began calling hospitals, checking social media, and driving around the city looking for any sign of them. The hotel staff reviewed security footage, confirming that Sarah and Michael had left the building but never returned. But what police found at the bridge would make this case unlike any other missing persons investigation. When officers arrived at the Golden Gate Bridge parking area, they found the couple's rental car exactly where security cameras had recorded it arriving. The car was locked, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. Inside, they discovered Sarah's purse, both of their phones, Michael's wallet, and, most heartbreakingly, Sarah's wedding bouquet from the reception. Still fresh, a symbol of joy now overshadowed by mystery. What struck investigators immediately was the complete absence of evidence. No personal belongings were found on the bridge itself, no witnesses came forward despite the location's heavy foot traffic, and no signs of struggle or disturbance anywhere in the area. The bridge's emergency phones, installed specifically for crisis intervention, showed no recent activity. Security cameras captured their car arriving, but revealed nothing about what happened after they parked. Detective Maria Santos, who would lead the investigation for the next 5 years, later described the scene as eerily clean. In most missing persons cases involving the Golden Gate Bridge, investigators find some trace evidence: clothing, shoes, personal items. The complete absence of any physical evidence would become the most puzzling part of this entire mystery. Within hours of the couple being reported missing, the Coast Guard launched one of the most extensive water search operations in the area's recent history. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept the bay from dawn until dusk. Coast Guard cutters deployed sonar equipment to scan the depths below the bridge. Professional dive teams explored the waters where currents typically carry objects and, tragically, bodies. The search operation expanded daily as hope for finding the couple alive diminished. Volunteers joined the professional rescue teams, covering miles of coastline on foot. The marine headlands, Angel Island, and beaches throughout the Bay Area were systematically searched. Local fishing boats and pleasure craft joined the effort, their captains scanning the waters they knew so well. After 72 hours of continuous searching, the critical window for water rescues, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. But even the recovery efforts yielded nothing. Despite the largest search operation in the area's recent history, it was as if Sarah and Michael had never existed. The emotional toll on both families was immediate and devastating. Sarah's parents, Robert and Linda Chen, flew down from Portland and essentially moved into a San Francisco hotel, refusing to leave until they had answers. Michael's parents, Carlos and Maria Rodriguez, took leave from their jobs to coordinate with investigators and organize search efforts. The families held daily press conferences, pleading for any information. They offered a reward that grew from $5,000 to $50,000 as weeks passed. Private investigators were hired when the family felt police efforts weren't enough. Jennifer Chen quit her job in Portland to dedicate herself full-time to finding her sister. The waiting was torture. Every phone call could be the news they desperately wanted, or the confirmation they feared. Sleep became impossible. Eating felt wrong when Sarah and Michael might be somewhere needing help. The families aged years in just weeks, their faces showing the strain of grief without closure. But as weeks turned to months, a disturbing pattern began to emerge that no one had noticed before. Detective Santos began investigating other missing persons cases near the Golden Gate Bridge, looking for any connection to Sarah and Michael's disappearance. What she found was troubling. Over the past 5 years, 7 other people had gone missing in the general area, their cases also remaining unsolved. Were these random tragedies, or was something more sinister happening? The investigation expanded to include possible serial predator theories. Could someone be targeting couples or individuals near the bridge? The FBI was consulted, and a behavioral analysis unit reviewed all 8 cases for patterns. Investigators looked into organized crime connections, wondering if the couple had somehow been targeted for reasons they couldn't yet understand. But each theory fell apart under scrutiny. The other missing persons had different demographics, different circumstances, and different timelines. There was no evidence of a serial killer, no connection to organized crime, and no apparent motive for anyone to harm Sarah and Michael. Just when investigators thought they had a breakthrough, everything they believed about this case was about to change. The first anniversary of Sarah and Michael's disappearance brought renewed media attention and a memorial service that hundreds attended. Friends from college, co-workers, and people who had never met the couple but were moved by their story came together at the exact spot where Michael had proposed. Flowers, photos, and handwritten notes covered the sidewalk. Linda Chen spoke through tears about her daughter's compassion as a pediatric nurse, how Sarah had dedicated her life to helping sick children. Carlos Rodriguez shared memories of his son's love for technology and his dream of starting a foundation to provide computers to underprivileged kids. The memorial was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a celebration of lives that seemed to have ended far too soon. New tips came in after the anniversary coverage, but each one led nowhere. Someone thought they saw the couple in Los Angeles 6 months after the disappearance. Another caller was certain they were living under assumed names in Oregon. Every lead was investigated thoroughly, but none provided the breakthrough everyone desperately needed. What they didn't know was that the ocean was slowly preparing to give up its secrets. Years 2, 3, and 4 passed with diminishing hope. The case officially went cold, though Detective Santos never closed the file. She reviewed it every few months, hoping new technology or a fresh perspective might reveal something previously missed. The families continued their private searches, hiring new private investigators and following up on tips that still trickled in occasionally. Other cases demanded police attention, and resources had to be allocated where they could do the most good. The media moved on to newer mysteries. Social media posts about Sarah and Michael became less frequent, then stopped altogether except for anniversary remembrances. By year 5, everyone had given up hope, everyone except the tide itself. Coast Guard Petty Officer First Class David Martinez had been patrolling the Northern California coastline for 8 years. His routine morning patrol on March 3rd started like hundreds of others, checking for vessels in distress, monitoring marine traffic, and scanning the beaches for anything unusual that might have washed ashore overnight. The weather had been particularly rough the week before, with winter storms bringing heavy waves and strong currents that often revealed items long hidden beneath the sand. Martinez had found everything from pieces of old shipwrecks to modern debris during his patrols, but he always approached each discovery with professional curiosity. That morning, the tide was lower than usual, exposing sections of beach that were typically underwater. The conditions were perfect for finding objects that the ocean had been hiding, sometimes for years. Officer Martinez had patrolled this stretch of beach hundreds of times, but what he spotted partially buried in the sand that morning would haunt him forever. At first, it looked like typical beach debris, something white and artificial, sticking up through the sand about 50 yards from the waterline. Martinez had seen everything from plastic bottles to pieces of fiberglass wash up on these shores. But as he approached the object, something about its shape and color made him pause. The way the morning light hit it, the deliberate curve of its form, this wasn't random garbage. As he bent down for a closer look, Martinez realized he was staring at a woman's high-heeled shoe. Not just any shoe, an elegant white satin pump, the kind worn to formal events. Despite being buried in sand and exposed to salt water for years, the shoe was remarkably preserved, protected by the very sand that had hidden it. As he carefully brushed sand away from the heel, Martinez realized he was staring at evidence from a case everyone thought was unsolvable. The shoe was beautiful, expensive, and heartbreakingly delicate. Martinez had attended enough Coast Guard briefings about missing persons to know that footwear, especially distinctive footwear, could be crucial evidence. He immediately called for backup and began establishing a perimeter around the discovery site, following protocol for potential evidence recovery. But this single shoe was only the beginning of what the ocean had been hiding. As Martinez waited for the forensic team, he began a careful visual search of the surrounding area. About 20 feet away, partially buried under driftwood and seaweed, he spotted fabric. Dark fabric that looked like it could be from a man's formal suit. Then more white fabric, this time looking like it could be from a dress or formal gown. Each discovery sent chills down Martinez's spine. He knew exactly which case these items might relate to. Every Coast Guard officer in the region knew about Sarah and Michael Chen Rodriguez, the newlyweds who had vanished from the Golden Gate Bridge 5 years earlier. The items scattered across this stretch of beach told a story that the ocean had been keeping secret since 2018. Within an hour, the beach was filled with investigators, forensic specialists, and crime scene photographers. The answer to what happened to Sarah and Michael was finally emerging from the waves, but it would raise even more disturbing questions than it answered. The evidence collection process took over 6 hours. Every item had to be photographed in place, carefully excavated from the sand, and properly preserved for laboratory analysis. The forensic team found pieces of formal attire, fragments of a dark suit jacket, pieces of white satin fabric consistent with a wedding dress, and several small personal items, including a wedding ring and what appeared to be pieces of a boutonniere. Each discovery was documented with GPS coordinates, photographed from multiple angles, and placed in evidence containers that would preserve any DNA or trace evidence that might remain after 5 years in the marine environment. The chain of custody was established immediately, ensuring that these items could be used in court if necessary. Initial field analysis suggested these items had been in the water for several years, consistent with the timeline of Sarah and Michael's disappearance. The condition of the fabrics and the way they had been preserved by sand and salt water would provide crucial information about how long they had been submerged and how they had traveled through the bay's complex current system. What the forensic analysis revealed would turn this missing persons case into something far more sinister. Detective Santos received the call she had been hoping for and dreading for 5 years. Evidence had been found that likely belonged to Sarah and Michael Chen Rodriguez. She immediately contacted both families, knowing that this news would bring both relief and renewed anguish. After 5 years of not knowing, they would finally have some answers, but answers that might be harder to bear than the uncertainty. The family's reactions were exactly what Santos expected. Tears of relief mixed with tears of grief. Linda Chen collapsed when she heard about the white satin shoe. She had helped Sarah pick out those exact shoes for the wedding, spending an entire day shopping to find the perfect pair. Carlos Rodriguez asked to see the suit fabric, recognizing immediately the distinctive fabric pattern from the suit they had helped Michael select for his wedding. The discovery meant their loved ones were truly gone, but it also meant the case was active again. For the first time in years, there was hope for answers, for justice, for understanding what had really happened that night. But identifying the items was only the first step in uncovering what really happened that night. The forensic laboratory at the California Department of Justice became the center of intense activity as scientists began analyzing every piece of evidence recovered from the beach. DNA extraction from fabric that had been submerged in salt water for 5 years was challenging, but not impossible. Advanced techniques allowed investigators to recover genetic material that could definitively identify the item's owners. Fabric analysis revealed details about how the clothing had been damaged. Tears in the suit jacket weren't consistent with natural decomposition. They appeared to have been made by a sharp instrument. The wedding dress fabric showed similar unusual damage patterns. Environmental analysis of salt deposits and marine growth on the items helped establish how long they had been in the water and approximately where they had entered the bay. Most significantly, microscopic analysis revealed trace evidence that didn't belong in a marine environment: soil samples, plant material, and other substances that suggested these items had been on land, possibly buried, before entering the water. The lab results would soon reveal details that made investigators question everything they thought they knew. News of the evidence discovery spread quickly through social media and traditional news outlets. The story that had captivated the public 5 years earlier was front-page news again. Cable news networks devoted entire segments to the case, bringing in experts to discuss what the discovery might mean for the investigation. Public interest was intense and immediate. The Golden Gate Bridge became a pilgrimage site for people following the case, with flowers and notes appearing daily at the spot where Michael had proposed to Sarah. Social media exploded with theories, speculation, and renewed calls for justice. The hashtag Finding Truth began trending as people shared their own theories about what might have happened. While the public focused on the emotional aspects of the discovery, investigators were quietly uncovering evidence that suggested something much more calculated than a tragic accident or impulsive decision had occurred that wedding night. 3 days after the evidence discovery made headlines, Detective Santos received a call that would change the entire direction of the investigation. A woman named Patricia Hoffman contacted the police tip line saying she had information about Sarah and Michael that she had kept secret for 5 years. Patricia explained that she had been walking her dog near Crissy Field, about 2 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge, at around 1:30 a.m. on the night the couple disappeared. She had seen what looked like 2 people struggling near the shoreline, with a third person standing nearby. At the time, she thought it might be friends helping someone who had too much to drink, so she didn't interfere. But after seeing news coverage of the evidence discovery, Patricia realized what she might have witnessed. She described seeing a vehicle with its lights off parked illegally near the beach access road. The struggling had stopped abruptly, and she had seen the third person dragging something toward the water. This witness's account would completely change the direction of the investigation. Patricia's description was detailed and specific. She remembered the third person was wearing dark clothing and appeared to be significantly taller than the other 2 people. She had seen this person making multiple trips between the vehicle and the water's edge, as if moving several objects. The entire incident had taken about 20 minutes, after which the vehicle had left, without turning on its headlights until it reached the main road. Detective Santos immediately ordered a review of all security footage from the area around Crissy Field from that night. Traffic cameras, business security systems, and even private home security cameras were examined with this new timeline in mind. What they found in the enhanced footage contradicted everything they believed about that night. Security footage from a traffic camera near the Golden Gate Bridge showed Sarah and Michael's rental car leaving the bridge parking area at 12:31 a.m., just 8 minutes after it had arrived. But enhanced analysis revealed something investigators had missed 5 years earlier. The car's occupancy appeared different when it left than when it arrived. While they couldn't see clearly inside the vehicle, the way it sat on its suspension suggested more weight when departing than when arriving. Additional footage from a camera 2 miles away showed the same rental car arriving at Crissy Field at 12:47 a.m. The timestamp was crucial. It placed the vehicle at the location where Patricia had witnessed the struggle at exactly the time she described. But most importantly, the footage showed the rental car leaving Crissy Field at 1:52 a.m. and returning to the Golden Gate Bridge parking area, where it was found the next morning. The timeline was now clear. Someone had used Sarah and Michael's rental car to transport their bodies from an unknown primary crime scene to Crissy Field, where they were disposed of in the bay. The Golden Gate Bridge location was deliberately chosen to mislead investigators and suggest suicide. The phone records showed something that made investigators realize they'd been looking for the wrong thing all along. Analysis of Sarah and Michael's phone records revealed information that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. Both phones had been active until approximately 11:15 p.m. on their wedding night, about 30 minutes before they were seen leaving the hotel on security footage. But the location data from their phones showed something impossible. The phones were pinging cell towers near Oakland, while the hotel security footage showed them at the Fairmont in San Francisco. This meant someone else had their phones during those final hours. More disturbing, both phones received multiple text messages after 11:15 p.m., messages that went unread, suggesting the phones were no longer in Sarah and Michael's possession. The final phone activity for both devices was recorded at 1:23 a.m. at a location consistent with Crissy Field just minutes before Patricia witnessed the struggle on the beach. The phone evidence proved that Sarah and Michael had been killed somewhere else, and their phones had been used to create a false timeline. Someone had carefully orchestrated every detail to make it appear the couple had driven to the Golden Gate Bridge and jumped together, when in reality they had been murdered hours earlier at an unknown location. The investigation into Sarah and Michael's financial situation revealed information that added new dimensions to the case. Both had substantial life insurance policies, $500,000 each, which wasn't unusual for a young married couple with good incomes. But what caught investigators' attention was the timing of certain changes to their financial accounts. 3 weeks before the wedding, Michael had updated the beneficiary on his retirement account, changing it from his parents to Sarah. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah had increased her life insurance coverage and added Michael as the primary beneficiary. While these changes seemed normal for a couple about to marry, the timing raised questions about whether someone else knew about these policies. Bank records showed no unusual activity in the days before the disappearance, no large withdrawals, and no evidence that either Sarah or Michael was planning to disappear voluntarily. Their financial situation was stable, with significant savings for their age and no debts beyond a reasonable mortgage and car payments. What they discovered in the financial records suggested this wasn't a random tragedy. The insurance angle became more significant when investigators learned that both policies included double indemnity clauses for accidental death, meaning the beneficiaries would receive twice the payout if the deaths were ruled accidental rather than suicide. If Sarah and Michael had jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge together, the deaths would likely be ruled suicide, and the insurance companies wouldn't pay. But if they had been murdered, the policies would pay out the full double amount. Someone had a financial motive worth $2 million to kill Sarah and Michael and make it look like an accident rather than suicide. The insurance investigation was about to reveal the most shocking aspect of this entire case. As investigators dug deeper into the insurance policies, they discovered something that changed everything. The policies had been purchased through the same insurance agent, someone who had detailed knowledge of the coverage amounts, the beneficiary arrangements, and the double indemnity clauses. This agent would have known exactly how the deaths needed to appear in order to trigger the maximum payouts. The insurance agent was Thomas Brennan, a longtime family friend who had attended Sarah and Michael's wedding. Tom had sold insurance to both families for over 15 years, handling policies for parents, siblings, and eventually the couple themselves. He was trusted, experienced, and had intimate knowledge of both families' financial situations. But more disturbing was what investigators found when they examined Tom's own financial situation. He was facing bankruptcy due to gambling debts, his marriage was falling apart due to financial stress, and he was being investigated by the State Insurance Commission for several irregularities in client accounts. Tom had both the knowledge and the motive to commit this crime, but investigators needed more evidence to prove his involvement. What they found buried deeper in the sand at Crissy Field would expose the calculated nature of this crime. Returning to the original discovery site, with ground-penetrating radar and metal detectors, the Coast Guard forensic team found additional evidence that had been deliberately buried. 2 feet beneath where the wedding dress fabric had been found, investigators discovered a plastic bag containing Sarah's jewelry from the wedding, her earrings, necklace, and most significantly, her engagement ring, which she would never have removed voluntarily. The jewelry was wrapped in a towel that forensic analysis would later prove came from the Fairmont Hotel, the same hotel where Sarah and Michael had spent their wedding night. The towel had been used to muffle sounds, evidenced by trace amounts of blood and saliva found in the fabric fibers. Someone had planned every detail of this crime, including the disposal of evidence, but they couldn't control the power of the ocean. The deliberate burial of evidence proved premeditation. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous act. Someone had carefully planned the murders, the disposal of the bodies, and the staging of the crime scene to look like a suicide pact. The ocean's currents had eventually brought some evidence to the surface, but it had taken 5 years for nature to reveal these carefully hidden secrets. The evidence now supported a clear theory. Sarah and Michael had been killed in their hotel room or shortly after leaving it. Their bodies had been transported to Crissy Field and disposed of in the bay, while their rental car was moved to the Golden Gate Bridge to create the appearance of suicide. The killer had kept their phones to send misleading location data, then disposed of them in the water near where the bodies had been dumped. Investigators realized they had been looking in the wrong place from the beginning. The Golden Gate Bridge wasn't the crime scene. It was part of an elaborate cover-up designed to conceal a double murder motivated by greed. If Sarah and Michael didn't jump from the bridge, where were they really killed? Re-examining the hotel security footage with this new understanding, investigators noticed something they had missed before. At 11:52 p.m., just minutes before Sarah and Michael were seen leaving the hotel, someone else had exited through a service entrance that wasn't covered by the main security cameras. The timestamp and location suggested this person could have been in the hotel at the same time as the couple. Hotel records showed that only one person not staying at the hotel had accessed the building that night using a service entrance: Tom Brennan. He had claimed to investigators 5 years earlier that he had gone home immediately after the wedding reception, but credit card records showed he had purchased gas at a station near the hotel at 11:35 p.m., 15 minutes before Sarah and Michael were seen leaving for the last time. Phone records revealed that Tom had called both Sarah and Michael at 11:10 p.m., just 5 minutes before their phones stopped responding to incoming messages. He had told investigators that he was calling to congratulate them again and confirm their insurance coverage was adequate for their honeymoon travel, but the timing now seemed suspicious. Had Tom lured them somewhere under the pretense of handling their insurance paperwork? The real crime scene wasn't the hotel room, and it wasn't the Golden Gate Bridge. Investigators believed Tom had convinced Sarah and Michael to meet him somewhere private to sign additional insurance documents or handle some urgent paperwork that couldn't wait until after their honeymoon. The real crime scene was miles away from where everyone had been looking. Analysis of trace evidence found on the clothing fragments led investigators to a specific location, an industrial area near the Oakland port where Tom's uncle owned a shipping warehouse. Soil samples from the fabric matched the unique composition of dirt found around the warehouse loading dock. Pollen analysis revealed plant species that grew only in that specific area of Oakland. The warehouse had been empty the night of the murders, as shipping operations were suspended for the weekend. Tom had access to the building through his uncle, and it was isolated enough that no one would have heard or seen anything unusual. Investigators believed this was where Sarah and Michael had been killed, probably shortly after 11:30 p.m. when they thought they were meeting Tom for a brief insurance matter. The warehouse's concrete floors and industrial drainage system would have made it easy to clean up evidence, and its proximity to the bay provided convenient access for body disposal. Tom could have killed the couple, loaded their bodies into their own rental car, and driven to Crissy Field to dispose of them in the water before returning the car to the Golden Gate Bridge parking area to complete his elaborate deception. With enough evidence to obtain search warrants, investigators focused their attention on Tom Brennan. He had continued working as an insurance agent after the murders, even handling the life insurance claims for Sarah and Michael's families, a level of calculated cruelty that shocked investigators. For 5 years, Tom had comforted the grieving families while knowing exactly what had happened to their children. Surveillance of Tom revealed suspicious behavior. He made frequent trips to the Oakland warehouse area, sometimes just sitting in his car and staring at the building where he had likely committed the murders. He had also been researching ocean currents and tidal patterns in the San Francisco Bay, information he would need to predict when and where evidence might surface. Most damning was Tom's reaction to news of the evidence discovery. While the families were relieved to finally have some answers, Tom appeared panicked. Surveillance footage showed him visiting a storage unit he rented under a false name, removing several boxes and burning their contents in a remote location. What they observed would finally give them the breakthrough they needed. Investigators decided to approach Tom directly, hoping to provoke a reaction that might lead to additional evidence or even a confession. Detective Santos and FBI agents arrived at Tom's office on a Wednesday morning, ostensibly to ask follow-up questions about the insurance policies and his relationship with the couple. Tom's behavior during the interview was telling. He was nervous, sweating despite the cool temperature, and his story about the night of the murders had changed slightly from his original statement 5 years earlier. Most significantly, he volunteered information about ocean currents that he shouldn't have known unless he had researched them, and he made several references to evidence being impossible to find after so long in the water. When investigators mentioned they had recovered physical evidence from the beach, Tom's reaction was immediate and visceral. He asked specific questions about what had been found and where, information that suggested guilty knowledge rather than innocent curiosity. After 5 years of lies, the truth was finally about to come out. Under increasing pressure during the interview, Tom made several statements that contradicted his earlier accounts. He claimed he had never been to the hotel that night, then admitted he might have stopped by briefly. He said he hadn't spoken to Sarah and Michael after the reception, then acknowledged he might have called them to handle some insurance paperwork. Most significantly, when investigators mentioned the witness who had seen someone disposing of items at Crissy Field, Tom volunteered details about that location that he shouldn't have known. He mentioned specific features of the beach access road and the shoreline that weren't visible from the main road, information only someone who had been there in the dark would possess. While Tom didn't confess outright, his statements provided enough probable cause for an arrest warrant. The partial admissions, combined with the physical evidence and circumstantial proof, convinced prosecutors they could build a strong case. But the suspect's version of events would prove to be just another lie. On March 15th, exactly 12 days after the Coast Guard discovered the first piece of evidence, Tom Brennan was arrested at his office on charges of double murder. The arrest made headlines across the country as news outlets covered the shocking betrayal by a trusted family friend who had allegedly murdered a couple on their wedding night for insurance money. The charges included 2 counts of first-degree murder, fraud, insurance fraud, and tampering with evidence. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty, citing the especially heinous nature of the crime, murdering newlyweds on what should have been the happiest night of their lives. The Coast Guard's discovery had finally brought justice, but the complete truth was still hidden. Public reaction was swift and emotional. Social media exploded with outrage that someone so trusted could commit such a betrayal. The insurance industry faced scrutiny about safeguards and oversight. Most importantly, Sarah and Michael's families finally had someone to hold accountable for their unimaginable loss, though they also had to grapple with the knowledge that someone they had trusted had been their children's killer all along. Tom Brennan hired one of California's most experienced criminal defense attorneys, someone known for handling high-profile murder cases. The defense strategy became clear during pre-trial motions. They would argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that other suspects hadn't been adequately investigated, and that the ocean environment had compromised the forensic evidence beyond reliable analysis. Prosecutors spent months preparing their case, organizing evidence chronologically and scientifically to tell the story of what had happened that night. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, prepared forensic experts to testify about the evidence, and worked with oceanographers to explain how the currents had carried evidence from Crissy Field to the discovery site 5 years later. Media attention was intense, with legal analysts predicting this would be one of the most closely watched trials in recent California history. The families prepared themselves for the painful process of reliving their trauma in public, but they were determined to see justice served. The trial would reveal details that made this case even more shocking than anyone imagined. The trial began on a rainy Monday morning in San Francisco Superior Court. Judge Patricia Walsh presided over a courtroom packed with family members, media representatives, and members of the public who had followed the case for years. Opening statements would set the tone for what prosecutors called a case of ultimate betrayal and what the defense termed a rush to judgment. Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez outlined the state's case methodically. She described Tom Brennan as a trusted family friend who had used his knowledge of insurance policies and his access to both families to plan and execute a calculated double murder. The motive was clear: financial desperation driving him to kill 2 innocent people for insurance money he would never have received directly but could have accessed through various fraudulent means. The defense attorney, Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah's family, argued that the state's case was built on speculation and circumstantial evidence. He claimed that other suspects, including possible serial killers or random criminals, hadn't been adequately investigated. Most controversially, he suggested that Sarah and Michael might have been victims of human trafficking, taken alive and later killed elsewhere. But the defense had a surprise that would complicate everything. The prosecution began with forensic evidence, calling oceanographers to explain how evidence could remain hidden for 5 years before surfacing. DNA experts testified about recovering genetic material from items submerged in saltwater. The testimony was technical, but crucial for establishing that the evidence found on the beach had indeed belonged to Sarah and Michael. Patricia Hoffman, the witness who had seen the disposal at Crissy Field, provided compelling testimony about what she had observed that night. Under cross-examination, she remained consistent in her account, providing details that corroborated the prosecution's timeline. Hotel staff testified about Tom's presence at the hotel that night and his use of the service entrance. The family's testimony was emotionally devastating. Linda Chen described helping Sarah choose the wedding shoes that were found on the beach. Carlos Rodriguez identified fabric fragments from his son's wedding suit. Their pain was evident, but so was their determination to see justice served. The most devastating testimony was yet to come. Against his attorney's advice, Tom Brennan decided to testify in his own defense. This decision surprised legal experts, as defendants in capital murder cases rarely take the stand. Tom's testimony began with his account of the wedding reception and his claim that he had gone straight home afterward. Under direct examination by his attorney, Tom maintained his innocence and provided explanations for evidence that seemed to implicate him. He claimed the phone calls to Sarah and Michael were routine insurance follow-ups. He said his presence at the hotel was coincidental, that he had stopped by to retrieve something he had left during the reception setup earlier that day. But under cross-examination by Prosecutor Martinez, Tom's story began to fall apart. She pressed him on details about the warehouse, the insurance policies, and his knowledge of ocean currents. With each question, Tom became more defensive and his answers less believable. Under pressure, the defendant was about to reveal the one detail that explained everything. Under the relentless pressure of cross-examination, Tom's composure finally cracked. When Prosecutor Martinez asked him directly about his gambling debts and the exact amount he owed to various creditors, Tom's response revealed the depth of his desperation. He owed over $800,000 to loan sharks and illegal gambling operations, debts that came with violent consequences for non-payment. But it was his next admission that stunned the courtroom. Tom revealed that he hadn't planned to kill Sarah and Michael that night. He had lured them to the warehouse under the pretense of signing additional travel insurance documents for their honeymoon, planning only to forge their signatures on fraudulent policies that would allow him to embezzle money from their accounts over time. The murders happened when Michael became suspicious of the paperwork and threatened to call the police. In a moment of panic, knowing that exposure would mean financial ruin and possibly physical harm from his creditors, Tom had struck Michael with a tire iron he found in the warehouse. Sarah's death followed moments later when she tried to run and call for help. The truth was more twisted than the most elaborate conspiracy theory. Tom's testimony revealed the horrifying sequence of events that night. After killing the couple in a blind panic, he had spent nearly 3 hours figuring out how to dispose of their bodies and cover up the crime. The elaborate staging wasn't planned. It was desperate improvisation by someone who realized he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He described loading their bodies into their rental car, driving to Crissy Field, because he knew the area from childhood fishing trips with his uncle. The disposal process was gruesome and methodical. He weighted down the bodies using chains from the warehouse, then spent time collecting personal items to bury separately, thinking the ocean would never give up its secrets. The most chilling part of his testimony was his description of returning to the Golden Gate Bridge to stage the scene. He left their phones in the rental car, cleaned any fingerprints he might have left, and walked home through the city, arriving at his apartment just before dawn. For 5 years, he had lived with this secret while comforting the families he had destroyed. Every detail had been calculated, except for one thing the killer couldn't control. Tom couldn't have predicted that a major storm 5 years later would shift sand patterns and ocean currents in a way that brought evidence to the surface. He couldn't have known that his careful burial of evidence at Crissy Field would eventually be undone by natural forces beyond his control. Nature itself had become the ultimate detective in this case, slowly but inevitably revealing the truth he thought he had hidden forever. The prosecution used oceanographic experts to explain how the evidence had traveled through the bay system over 5 years. Currents, tides, and seasonal storm patterns had gradually moved items from the original disposal site to where they were discovered. The ocean had preserved evidence in sand and salt that would have degraded on land, ultimately providing the key to solving what had seemed like a perfect crime. Even the timing of the discovery wasn't random. The Coast Guard expert testified that the combination of winter storms and unusual low tides created the exact conditions needed for buried evidence to surface. Tom had counted on the ocean keeping his secrets forever, but the same waters that had hidden his crime eventually exposed it. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Tom Brennan was found guilty on all counts, 2 counts of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and tampering with evidence. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and grief as the families finally heard the words they had waited 5 years to hear: guilty. The jury foreman later told reporters that Tom's own testimony had sealed his fate. His detailed knowledge of the crime scene, combined with the physical evidence and witness testimony, left no reasonable doubt about his guilt. The defense's attempts to suggest alternative theories had fallen flat when confronted with the overwhelming evidence of Tom's involvement. Judge Walsh scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, but the families knew they had achieved what they had fought for since that horrible night 5 years ago. Justice had finally been served, though it could never bring back Sarah and Michael or erase the pain of their loss. But even with justice served, one final revelation would change how everyone viewed this case. At sentencing, Judge Walsh delivered a life sentence without the possibility of parole, noting the especially heinous nature of the crime and the betrayal of trust involved. She spoke directly to Tom about the magnitude of his actions, not just the murders themselves, but the 5 years of deception that followed, during which he had pretended to comfort the very families he had destroyed. The impact statements from both families were heart-wrenching. Linda Chen spoke about the sleepless nights, the constant wondering, the hope that gradually turned to despair. Carlos Rodriguez described how the uncertainty had torn their family apart, how they had blamed themselves for not protecting their son. Both families expressed relief that the truth was finally known, even though it came at such a terrible cost. Tom's final words to the court were brief and seemed inadequate given the magnitude of his crimes. He apologized to the families, claiming he thought about Sarah and Michael every day and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. The families thought their ordeal was over, but the convicted killer had one last secret to reveal. 2 months after sentencing, Tom contacted prosecutors through his attorney with an offer. He claimed to have information about other unsolved cases in the Bay Area, cases where his knowledge of insurance policies and access to client information might have played a role. He wanted to trade this information for a transfer to a less restrictive prison facility. The revelation that Tom might be connected to other disappearances sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Investigators began reviewing every case he might have had knowledge of, every client who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. This confession would reopen investigations into other unsolved cases that had puzzled detectives for years. Tom's lawyer arranged for him to meet with a task force of detectives from multiple jurisdictions. What they learned during these interviews was disturbing. Tom had been targeting clients with substantial life insurance policies for over a decade, though Sarah and Michael were apparently his first victims. His gambling addiction had driven him to increasingly desperate measures, and murder had become his final solution. The investigation into Tom's other potential victims revealed a pattern of suspicious circumstances surrounding several of his clients' deaths over the past 15 years. While many appeared to be accidents or natural causes, the timing and insurance payouts now seemed suspicious. Families of other victims were contacted, and several cold cases were reopened with new scrutiny. The scope of Tom's crimes appeared to be much larger than anyone had initially suspected. He had used his position as a trusted insurance agent to identify potential victims, learn their habits and routines, and in some cases, arrange their deaths to look like accidents. The Golden Gate Bridge case was just the beginning of a much larger investigation into what might have been a serial killer operating in plain sight for over a decade. This case fundamentally changed how missing persons investigations are conducted in the San Francisco Bay Area. The elaborate staging of the crime scene at the Golden Gate Bridge led to new protocols for examining seemingly obvious suicide cases. Investigators now look more carefully at insurance policies, financial motives, and the backgrounds of people who had access to victims' personal information. The Coast Guard also implemented new procedures for evidence recovery, recognizing that ocean currents can preserve and transport evidence over much longer distances and time periods than previously understood. The techniques developed during the analysis of Sarah and Michael's case have since been used to solve other cold cases involving evidence recovered from marine environments. Most importantly, the case highlighted the need for better oversight in the insurance industry. New regulations were implemented requiring additional scrutiny of policies sold by agents facing financial difficulties, and systems were put in place to flag unusual patterns in policy changes or claims. The goal was to prevent other predators from using their professional positions to identify and target victims. 5 years after the discovery of evidence on that beach, Sarah and Michael's families have found a measure of peace. They established the Chen Rodriguez Foundation, which provides support to families of missing persons and funds advanced forensic techniques for cold case investigations. Their advocacy has helped pass legislation improving resources for missing persons cases and victim support services. Linda Chen now speaks at conferences about the importance of never giving up hope and the need for persistent investigation even when cases seem hopeless. Carlos Rodriguez has worked with the Coast Guard to improve evidence recovery techniques and train officers in recognizing potential crime scene evidence in marine environments. Their pain will never fully heal, but they have channeled their grief into helping other families facing similar tragedies. The memorial garden they created at the spot where Michael proposed to Sarah has become a place of healing for many families dealing with loss. The bronze plaque reads simply, "In memory of Sarah Chen and Michael Rodriguez, whose love story reminds us that truth will always find a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried." This case teaches us that modern investigations require persistence, advanced technology, and sometimes patience for nature itself to reveal its secrets. The combination of traditional detective work, forensic science, and environmental analysis proved that even the most carefully planned crimes leave traces that can eventually be discovered. The most important lesson is that cases are never truly cold. They're just waiting for the right combination of technology, timing, and dedication to bring them back to life. Sarah and Michael's case remained unsolved for 5 years, but the evidence was there all along, waiting for the ocean to reveal it at the right moment. Tom Brennan thought he had committed the perfect crime, but he underestimated the power of persistence, the advancement of forensic science, and the ocean's ability to preserve and eventually reveal evidence. His betrayal of trust was complete, but it wasn't absolute. Truth has a way of surfacing when we least expect it. The most important lesson came from an unexpected source, the families themselves, who never stopped believing that answers would come. Their faith in justice, their support for each other, and their determination to keep Sarah and Michael's memory alive ultimately contributed to solving the case. Their love proved stronger than the evil that had tried to destroy them. The truth about what happened to Sarah and Michael Chen Rodriguez on their wedding night was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. A trusted friend, driven by gambling debts and financial desperation, had murdered them in cold blood and spent 5 years deceiving their families while they grieved. But the ocean itself became their ally, slowly and patiently revealing the evidence needed to bring their killer to justice. This case reminds us that evil often hides behind familiar faces, that trust can be betrayed in the most devastating ways, and that some people will destroy innocent lives to solve their own problems. But it also shows us that truth has a power all its own. It may be buried, hidden, or disguised, but it will eventually find a way to surface. Sarah and Michael's story connects to universal themes of love, trust, betrayal, and ultimate justice. Their wedding day should have been the beginning of a beautiful life together, but instead it became the start of a mystery that would captivate the nation and ultimately expose the darkness that can lurk in the most trusted relationships. As we remember Sarah Chen and Michael Rodriguez, we honor not just their memory, but the determination of their families to never give up, the dedication of investigators who refused to let the case die, and the power of truth to emerge even from the deepest, darkest places. Their story reminds us to stay vigilant, to support families facing similar tragedies, and to never underestimate the importance of persistence in the pursuit of justice. Sarah and Michael's story proves that even when someone vanished without a trace, the truth can eventually surface. This Golden Gate Bridge disappearance became one of the most shocking missing person cases when the Coast Guard made their discovery 5 years later. Their mysterious disappearance reminds us that behind every unsolved mystery lies a family desperate for answers. If you're fascinated by true crime stories and missing persons investigations like this one, subscribe for more suspenseful disappearance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Remember, every missing person deserves to be found, and every cold case deserves justice, no matter how long it takes.